9/11, A Dark Day. Written by Ned Jensen. Introduction. The morning of September 11th, 2001 was much like any other day in New York City. The streets were choked with traffic, and people filled the sidewalks as they scurried to work. Horns honked, and an occasional siren pierced the noisy air. At the southern end of Manhattan Island, the twin towers of the World Trade Center stood like proud guards over the city. Thousands of workers exited taxis, buses, and underground subways, making their way to their World Trade Center offices, stacked 110 floors into the sky. High-speed elevators swiftly carried workers upward from the street level to their places of work. Then, as if out of nowhere, came the roar of jet engines overhead. The skyscraper-walled canyons of the city were used to loud and unusual sounds, but never one like this. As pedestrians looked skyward, they saw a large passenger jet flying unusually low, headed directly toward the World Trade Center. America under attack. Curiosity soon changed to astonished horror and disbelief as American Airlines Flight 11, carrying 87 passengers and crew members, shot like an arrow into upper floors of the North Tower. 17 minutes later, a second jet carrying 60 passengers and crew members, United Airlines Flight 175, crashed into the South Tower. Each crash was immediately followed by an enormous explosion, as the jets, filled with fuel, erupted into gigantic fireballs. Not long after, as Americans were getting news of the Twin Towers tragedy, reports came of another passenger jet crashing into the Pentagon, located across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. The Pentagon, which houses offices of the United States military, immediately caught fire. All 59 passengers and crew members aboard the plane were killed. The United States was under attack. It was now clear that these planes had been hijacked and intentionally used as missiles to destroy American landmarks. No one knew yet how many planes had been hijacked. Perhaps others were still out there. All planes in the air that morning were directed to land, while international flights to the United States were rerouted to airports in Canada and Mexico. All air traffic other than military aircraft was grounded. The skies over the United States fell strangely silent. In fact, one other plane, United Airlines Flight 93, had been hijacked. Using cell phones, passengers aboard the plane learned from friends and relatives on the ground that 3 other hijacked planes had been flown into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. Determined not to let their plane be used as a weapon, the passengers and crew mounted a counterattack against the hijackers. In response, the hijackers rolled the plane over. At 10:03, it crashed into the ground outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Many believe the hijackers' target was either the United States Capitol or the White House, both located in Washington, D.C. The brave passengers and crew stopped that attack, but all 40 of them died. Leroy Homer, Jr., hero of Flight 93. Leroy Homer, Jr. was the first officer of United Airlines Flight 93. Prior to working for United Airlines, he served 7 years on active duty in the U.S. Air Force and then rose to the rank of major while serving in the Air Force Reserves. Homer was 36 when Flight 93 was hijacked. He was among the crew that fought to keep the hijackers from reaching their planned destination. He is one of several heroes who died when the plane crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. President George W. Bush was visiting an elementary school in Florida when the first plane and then the second plane crashed into the Twin Towers. He was soon hustled off to his special plane, then escorted through the air by 6 fighter jets. Back at the White House that evening, he gave a 5-minute television speech to the nation in which he said, These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. American Airlines 11. Scheduled flight. Boston Logan International Airport to Los Angeles International Airport. Departed at 7:59 a.m. Crash. World Trade Center North at 8:45 a.m. United Airlines 175. Scheduled flight. Boston Logan International Airport to Los Angeles International Airport. Departed at 7:58 a.m. Crash. World Trade Center South at 9:05 a.m. American Airlines 77. Scheduled flight. Dulles International Airport to Los Angeles International Airport. Departed at 8:10 a.m. Crash. West side of Pentagon, 9:40 a.m. United Airlines 93. Scheduled flight. Newark International Airport to San Francisco International Airport. Departed at 8:10 a.m. Crash. Shanksville, Pennsylvania at 10:10 a.m. Twin Towers collapse. In New York City and Arlington, Virginia, home of the Pentagon, emergency responders were called into action. After the first plane crashed into the North Tower, police and firefighters began evacuating more than 14,000 workers from both the North and South Towers. Rescuers were able to quickly remove most of the workers from the floors beneath where the planes struck the towers. At 9:59, 56 minutes after the second plane smashed into the South Tower, one floor collapsed onto another, and the tower came crashing down. 29 minutes later, at 10:28, the North Tower collapsed. Escape from Twin Towers. Each tower was 110 stories. In each tower, 99% of those below the crash survived. At the impact area and above, survival was limited to just a handful of people in the South Tower. The debris from the two towers damaged surrounding buildings and set fires. resulting in the complete destruction of 2 other buildings nearby. Many other buildings suffered heavy damage, and some were later targeted for demolition. Many firefighters and police officers died in the buildings while trying to rescue hundreds of people trapped by the fires and heavy smoke. A total of 2,753 victims died as a result of the attack on the Twin Towers. They included citizens of more than 75 countries, both young and old. Even years after the attack on the World Trade Center, the official death toll continues to increase as people die from lung conditions and other diseases brought on by the destruction. Total number of victims who died as a result of the 9/11 attacks. World Trade Center, 2,753. Source, Associated Press. Pentagon, 184. Source, PBS. Shanksville, Pennsylvania, 40. Source, USA Today. The heroes. Through this terrible tragedy emerged thousands of heroes. They include firefighters, police officers, emergency medical workers, ordinary citizens, office workers, iron workers, and others who went to work removing the rubble and searching for victims. Some of these heroes made the greatest sacrifice by giving up their lives while trying to save others. The heaviest toll for emergency responders was paid by the New York Fire Department, which lost 341 firefighters and 2 paramedics. Most died when they were trapped inside the collapsing Twin Towers. When officials realized the towers were unstable, they attempted to order the rescuers who had entered the towers to evacuate. But faulty communication systems and all the chaos prevented the message from reaching the rescuers. A total of 60 police officers also lost their lives, as well as 8 emergency medical responders from private companies. Probably no story of heroism was more compelling than that of the dozens of victims aboard United Flight 93. The courage of those passengers and crew members prevented Flight 93 from destroying another target and taking more lives. No one will ever know exactly what happened, but we do know that those passengers were heroes. The cleanup. Immediately after the collapse of the Twin Towers on 9/11, workers began searching through and removing the smoking rubble in search of survivors and victims. The site became known as Ground Zero. At the Pentagon, similar efforts were taking place to remove debris from the damaged building and search for the bodies of the victims. Rubble from the Pentagon was cleared, and the building was repaired within a year. A memorial built next to the Pentagon building opened to the public exactly 7 years after the attacks. The cleanup of the World Trade Center took much longer. An army of iron workers, heavy equipment operators, and other workers labored around the clock. They cut apart tangled and twisted steel and hauled it away from the site. They carefully sifted through the debris, searching for the remains of victims. After nearly 9 months, they had removed 1.8 million tons of steel and concrete from the site where the Twin Towers once stood. What remained was a huge hole that became known as the Pit. people began plans to build a new World Trade Center, as well as a memorial to the victims. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, people quickly cleared away the wreckage. They erected a temporary memorial just 500 yards from the crash site. Years later, a permanent memorial to Flight 93 was built. The Memorial Plaza includes a black granite walkway where visitors can follow part of the flight path along the Wall of Names. The wall is made of 40 marble panels that are inscribed with the names of the passengers and crew. Who was responsible? Who was behind the deadly surprise attack? Suspicion quickly fell upon an organization of terrorists known as Al-Qaeda. This group formed about 20 years prior to the attacks, when Afghanistan was being invaded by what was then the Soviet Union. At that time, the United States sent money and other support to many resistance groups, hoping to prevent the invasion. This created a civil war within Afghanistan, which in turn allowed Al-Qaeda to form and grow. By 2001, Al-Qaeda's purpose was to rid the Middle East of the influence of the United States and Western Europe. A few hours after the attacks, the FBI released the names of 19 men suspected of hijacking the airplanes. Authorities found the suitcase of the hijackers' leader, which contained the names of all 19 hijackers, along with other important evidence. Before the end of the day, investigators also discovered evidence that pointed to Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden as the man behind the attacks. A swift response. Immediately following the September 11th attacks, the U.S. military began preparing plans to seek out those responsible. Although none of the men who hijacked the planes were Afghan, Al-Qaeda's operations were based in Afghanistan. Less than a month after September 11th, the United States and its allies began bombing suspected Al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan. Attacks were also carried out against the ruling Taliban, a fundamentalist Muslim group, some of whose members provided safe spots for Al-Qaeda within the borders of Afghanistan. President Bush and Congress passed the Homeland Security Act of 2002, which created a new government department, the Department of Homeland Security. Congress also passed the USA Patriot Act to help find, arrest, and prosecute terrorists. The Patriot Act allowed the government to listen in on phone calls, read email, and track U.S. citizens' online activity. Some people criticized it as a violation of personal freedoms. In March 2003, President Bush claimed that Iraq and its ruler, Saddam Hussein, were manufacturing very dangerous weapons of mass destruction. American troops invaded Iraq, and Saddam Hussein was executed. However, evidence proved that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There was also no clear tie between Iraq and the 9/11 attacks. In an attempt to prevent future attacks, the government tightened security along U.S. borders, at shipping ports, and at U.S. airports. Other countries around the world took similar action. In many ways, life after 9/11 was not the same. For more than 3 years, Al-Qaeda and its leader, Osama bin Laden, denied any involvement in the attacks. Finally, in 2004, bin Laden publicly claimed responsibility. He stated that the motive for the attacks was to punish the United States for stationing troops in Middle Eastern countries during the 1991 Gulf War and for its support of the country of Israel. Islamophobia after 9/11. Shortly after 9/11, President Bush urged Americans to treat Muslims living in the United States with respect. However, in the following weeks, hate crimes against Muslims increased dramatically. According to the FBI, anti-Muslim hate crimes jumped from 28 incidents in 2000 to 481 in 2001. These hate crimes were caused by Islamophobia, a dislike or prejudice against Islam or Muslims. Muslims were harassed, physically assaulted, and even killed by other citizens. They were also more likely to be targeted in police stops and random searches. Mosques, Muslim places of worship, were vandalized. Even people of other religions, especially people of Middle Eastern and South Asian descent, were persecuted. A man named Balbir Singh Sodhi was killed in Arizona by someone who wanted to get revenge for the 9/11 attacks. Sodhi belonged to the Sikh religion, but was mistakenly identified as Muslim because of his turban and beard. Between 2000 and 2009, the number of hate crimes experienced by Muslims increased 500%. For years, the United States pursued bin Laden. It nearly captured him in eastern Afghanistan before he fled across the border into Pakistan. On May 1, 2011, President Barack Obama announced that a U.S. Navy team with special training had launched a raid on a compound in Pakistan where bin Laden was thought to be hiding. They swiftly entered the compound and killed bin Laden. The last American soldiers departed Iraq. In 2011. In August of 2021, President Joe Biden brought U.S. troops back from Afghanistan. Tens of thousands of lives were lost in the war. At least 2.2 million Afghans have had to move to Iran and Pakistan, and the war has cost the United States approximately $2.3 trillion. A new trade center. Soon after the destruction of the Twin Towers, people launched plans to build a new structure on the site. In 2006, after much debate, construction of a new tower, One World Trade Center, began. The tower is one of the tallest buildings in the world. It was completed in 2014. Other towers are still being built on the site. In addition to the new buildings, a memorial and a museum were built at Ground Zero. The memorial honors those who lost their lives in the attacks. It features 2 large reflecting pools set within a grove of trees. The names of all the victims are inscribed in bronze panels bordering the pools. The memorial also features North America's largest artificial waterfalls. The pools and twin waterfalls were built within the footprints of where the Twin Towers once stood. The museum tells the story of 9/11 and the events leading up to the tragic day. It has portraits of the victims of the attack and artifacts from the original site. The museum's purpose is to educate the millions of people who visit the site each year. The hope is that what they learn will help build a better future for all people and prevent a tragedy like 9/11 from ever happening again.
Good job!